What we're going to have a look in this is some advanced masking and selection techniques. If someone was to come to me and say, I want to remove the sky in this image, this could be quite tricky. We could go to something like the magic wand tool and say, okay, well, let's jump in here and hit that, and hopefully that will do a good job with continuous unticked, so it's going to select all these blue areas in here. But we're not going to get a fantastic result for this. If I duplicate this layer, let's actually do that beforehand. So we've got a backup. Let's duplicate this layer, and I'm going to go wand, great, and then just go, let's delete that. You can see over here these branches don't look fantastic. It's a bit, a bit sort of run down from where, we can see we're losing a lot of detail in that. So is there a better way of doing this? And the answer is yes, there is, but we need to be a little bit cautious of the image and how it's done. And what we're really looking for in this technique, which is we're going to use, is called using channels. And in order for this to really work, we need to make sure that our background is quite different in color to our subject, or in range, so as far as light to dark. So to do this, I'm going to bring up the channels options, usually tucked next to the layers panel. Otherwise, go to window and go to channels. It's alphabetically, so I don't know why I was looking down the bottom, and there are channels. I'm going to rip this panel off so I have it separately. So there it is there, and you can see it says RGB, and then we've got red, green and blue. RGB is obviously red, green and blue all together, full color. However, if we took on red, we can see that this is identifying the values in the red channels, green, and finally blue. And what I'm looking for is which channel has the most contrast between the area that I want to remove and the subject matter. So in this case, I want to remove the sky, so blue is going to work because the sky is blue, and that's going to be mostly white, so that's going to be the most amount of blue, and then the rest of it's mostly greens and reds, and the lighter it is, the more influence. So blue's going to work for me. I'm going to leave it on that. Now what I'm going to do is try and ramp up the variation between this as far as levels go. To do that, I'm going to use specifically that, levels. I'm going to go image, adjust, and go to levels, or you can go command or control L. And this is our histogram. It's going to show us our levels, and this is our dark point, this is our light point, and this is our mid-tone here, and we can start pushing this in. And I'm just going to bring the dark point in a little bit. As we can see, it gets darker and darker. Now be cautious with this. If you do it too extreme, it's going to burn out your image. It's starting to make this area a bit darker, so let's start pushing the variances around a little bit. I'm going to bring my lighter points in. Let's bring my dark points up again. And really what I'm trying to find is trying to get that really good contrast between the dark and the light points. And I think that's getting pretty close. You can always hit the preview and sort of give it an idea of if we're killing too much detail, but that's pretty good, I think. So let's hit that there. We do have some issues here, but let's hit OK, and away we go. And what we're going to do now is I'm going to try and fix up some of these areas which there's little white dots. Remember, if there's white dots, when we go to select it, it's going to select those around. So all I'm going to do for this is I'm going to go B for brush and select the dark area. And I'm currently on a soft round brush. If you need to get to the edges of something, it's going to look a bit weird, so you may need to switch to a hard round brush. So let's do that, and I'm just going to zip this around and see if I can clean up some of these little white specks. I'm not going to worry about the trees too much because that will probably look like branches and leaves anyway, but just along the edge here. Other option as well, grab your quick selection tool and drag that around, and that might help you define those edges, because it's not going to be concerned by these little gaps and stuff like that. Now hopefully I haven't crashed my computer. This is, as I may have mentioned before, one of the issues with running a 4K monitor with an old computer. It's going to chew up the processing power and could potentially crash an image. And there we go, it's going to do a pretty good job. Zip, 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 zip. Now there is some other options for doing this. In this image it's probably not necessary, but if you are doing things like hair where it's very fine and precise, you may wish to adjust the levels using a different technique, and I'm going to show you that right up the top here for the opposite thing that we're going to do, where I want to lighten this area. So realistically what I want is I want the sky to be completely white. I want everything else to be completely black, and I want this little mottled area to be completely white. Now I could potentially go through with a white brush, but what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to use the dodge and burn tool. Now in a nutshell, dodge is going to lighten, burn is going to darken. However, these also have an option, so I'm going to select dodge to lighten because I want to make this lighter. Note that there is a range option for this. So range is set to either highlights, midtones, or shadows. If I select on shadows, which is not where I want, it's going to lighten up areas that are dark already. I want to get areas that are already light. These areas are already light, so if I click on here, and it's going to lighten those, and it's not going to do much to the areas that are already dark. It will a little to the midtones, so you just need to be a little bit cautious of that, but it's going to do a reasonably good job of allowing me to lightly brush over. If you're using a Wacom or a pen tool, you can set this to pen pressure, and as you get closer to the edges, you can just quickly lighten those around. So it does take a bit of finessing, but that is one of the techniques to really sort of ramp that up. And I think that's pretty good. So let's see how that works. So hopefully I've got my sky separated from my background. I'm just going to zip over this to make sure it's nice and bright. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to select that channel that I'm currently on, the blue one where I've turned it to black and white. And let's turn RGB back on, so we got our colors back. The colors are all messed up, so this is one of the reasons why I actually have made a duplicate, because this is going to mess up that layer. So because we're pushing the blues up from black to white, and we're pushing the extremes of that, these areas are going to be messed up because essentially we're getting rid of the blue in the RGB. So anyway, that we don't need to know that. And I'm going to press Command, and I'm going to select on that thumbnail for that blue channel, and you can see there we go, we've got our selection marching ants coming on here. And then what I'm going to do is, while that's still selected, I'm going to jump to my background layer. Let's do a brand new selection from the background layer, one that doesn't have the messed up colors. And in fact, I can delete that background layer once we're done anyway. And now that I have that selected, I can choose what I'm going to do with it. So let's turn that other one off, and if I hit delete, that is going to delete that selection. So let's see how that looks. That's pretty good, I think. It's a bit hard to see because we haven't got a background on there. If you need to inverse that, don't forget Shift Control I, or go select inverse if you want to remove the background and not the sky. So select inverse, and then that's going to do the opposite. So it depends what you need. Inverse is probably one of the most important shortcuts to try and remember. So I do want to get rid of the sky, not the background, so I'm going to inverse it again. I'm just going to hit delete in this case. Not the best option. I do want to talk about masks in a moment, so masking probably would be a bit better for this because it allows some freedom. I'm going to deselect that. Let's drop in a background. I'm just going to do a plain background, new layer, drag it below, paint bucket. Let's find something that's just going to be out of the world a little bit. Let's just show something like green, just to prove a point. Let's ramp that green up a little bit more. Done. And we are going to run into, I'm going to turn these channels off now, and let's delete that one. So this is our background, and this is our image. And here's the problem, is that we are going to get some light leakage on our tree and our leaves where we've cut out. So these branches and leaves are quite fine, and the background was blue, so that's going to leak out through there and have some influence on our image, so it's just going to look a little bit weird. Now there is a solution to this, kind of a hack I want to say, is what we're going to do is we're going to go to our background layer. There it is there. The background is, our image layer, our background is cut out. So, and I want to reselect that, so I'm going to hit Command and select that, and then I'm going to create a new layer, or you can create a new layer first. But I want to be on a blank layer, and I want that layer selected, so that's everything except for that background basically. And then what I'm going to do is use a mask. Now masks are fantastic. They're essentially, what they do is they allow you to hide certain elements so they don't destroy your image. So I'm going to create a mask, and by having this selected, which is all this ground plane and the trees, and by pushing this mask button, which is the rectangle with a circle in it, it will create a mask of that blank layer. And if you can see here, we can see basically we can see the two trees here, and the background is in black. Anything in a mask that is pure white is visible. Anything that is black is invisible. So it's important to remember that if you have something that's grey or mid grey, it is going to have, say, 50% transparency. So the darker the grey, the more invisible it's going to be. The lighter, the more visible. So pure white, completely visible. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to select on the actual blank layer itself. Now it's important to remember that the layer and the mask are separate entities, and you can right click and do different things with both of these. There is also a link between them, which means wherever you move the layer, the mask will move with it, scale it, rotate it, or you can unlink it and move the mask separately to the layer and vice versa. But for this and most of what we're going to do, leave it linked. It's going to be suitable for what we're using it for. Alright, this is what we're going to do though. I want to get rid of this blue bleed from the sky, so I'm going to go B for brush. In this case, I'm going to select a soft round brush. If you're using a Wacom or pen tablet, you probably want to select something with a bit of pressure for opacity. It does make your life a little bit more subtle, but I'm using a mouse for this, and I'm going to use a pretty large brush, as you can see there. Then what I'm going to do is get my color picker up. I'm going to press Alt to bring up the color picker. It is in the shortcut here somewhere. I can never find it because I don't use it. It's right there, but just press Alt. It's right there. And now I'm going to hover over the leaves in the middle area and see if I can find something that's going to be close to what the leaf color actually is. And then I'm going to brush this just softly around the edge of those leaves. Now it's not really fantastic at the moment because I need to add a blend mode to this. So there's my layer. Make sure you select on the layer. Go to drop mode here, and then you can start cycling down through this. And you can see multiply is already doing something quite interesting. I'm going to cycle down, cycle down, cycle down. And overlay usually does quite well. And also sometimes you get stuff with hard light, but you've got to watch out that it doesn't over influence your layer. And I'm going to go down right towards the bottom. Hue, saturation, and color. So the one I usually recommend is color, because it's literally going to add a color that you've selected to whatever is on that layer. Multiply can be good, but it can also darken your area as well. So I'm just going to go straight to color for this, and let's make my brush a little bit smaller, and I'm just going to paint in those areas with the influence. Now if you do want to get specky, you can obviously pick out the colors separately and add them in, and be mindful of sort of what's going on in different locations for that, and just brush that around the edge. And hopefully after a little bit of finessing, you can get those colors to hopefully match a little bit more, and you don't end up with that bluish effect around that bleeding blue light coming through, and you can zip through. So I'm really doing this kind of rushed, but you can see how it's going to work for that. And there we have it. We've got a reasonable repair in a very short amount of time as a color correction for that, using a blend mode and a mask. Now with the mask, if I right click, I can disable that mask, and you can see that's what I've painted on. So that's kind of where the mask comes in play. I do want to talk about masks specifically, so while that's fantastic, I am actually going to delete all that and go on to show you guys how to use masks. So once again, I'm going to duplicate this layer just so I've got something to play with. I'm going to turn the visibility off so it doesn't mess me up. The reason why I turn the visibility off in the background one, if I've got a duplicate, is if I do erase anything from this and I have the background turned on, I can go, oh look, I've erased a whole lot of stuff. You won't be able to see it because the background image is exactly the same. So it can be quite foxing, and you go, I think I've erased something but I can't see it. So just turn that off, and that way we can see the influence of this. Alright, let's talk masks. As with the channels, if you create a shape or a selection, I should say, and hit the mask, it will hide everything outside of that selection. Pretty simple. And create a mask. So There's the circle, there it is. And there's our mask. Black is invisible, white is visible. The other thing with masks is select on the mask. You can paint into the mask. You can go B for brush and you can start painting back and you will get your image. Now please note I have selected white as a color, so white makes it visible. If I switch this to black, it will make it invisible, so I can start hiding my image. If I turn this to say a 50% value, by the way, it doesn't matter what color you choose, it's always going to come out as a gray when you're on the mask, so it doesn't really matter. This is going to allow me to, you can see, paint a transparency based on the value of that. The darker it is, the more invisible it's going to be. So if I go a lighter gray, you can see now it's got a bit less of a transparency on it. So there we go. So black invisible, white visible, anywhere in between is going to have a influence on it depending. So don't forget, use your lasso tools if you want to get like a nice clean edge, and you may want to use the paint bucket tool, but for most cases, you know, brush tool is going to be relatively quick if you get yourself a nice big brush tool. So there's the mask. This one's complete absolute mess, so I'm just going to right click on that and delete layer mask. So what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to show you guys how to potentially use the mask to cut out things like hair and trees and stuff like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to have my layer here and I'm going to apply a mask without having anything selected. So there it is there. It's completely white, which means everything is visible. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to double click into that mask. It's going to enter into a mask mode. You can see the screen has changed here, and I need to start subtracting what I don't want. So I actually want to remove the sky here, so we actually have some tools for this. We've got a quick selection tool that could come in quite handy. So I'm going to press Alt to select subtract, and I'm going to start dragging that down, and let's reduce my brush size, and Alt, and let's start dragging that through some of the other main areas. Now this isn't probably going to work all that well because we've got all these little finicky gaps in it, but I do want to show you an idea of how the masks work in this while still using the same image. So quick selection, don't forget, if you do not have Alt on, it will typically rebuild, so you can click and drag over areas you want to rebuild. But let's check out the view option here. This is actually quite kind of important. The view option allows us to choose, and got a little drop down here, onion skin, marching ants, overlay, on black, on white, black and white, on layers. These are great because this allows you to actually have an idea of what is in the background. So here I've got overlay, and by default it's sort of this reddy color, and you can also look at the opacity of this. So as you play around with this, a bit hard to see maybe, but you can actually see the image behind it, so you can sort of go, okay, well I can see the branches, so I actually need to add some of those. Use the quick selection tool for that and get a little bit closer, or I need to remove some of this, so Alt, and that will subtract a little bit as well. So you can play around with that. If you don't want to see that, you can ramp the opacity up and it will just show you this big red background. So that's kind of cool. You can see what's being hidden and what isn't. So if there's parts of the wall that have disappeared, you can bring them back. You also have a few other tools here. You've got your poly and regular lasso tool here, and also you've got your object selection tool, so that's the new one as well, and a brush tool. So brush tool is going to allow you to manually paint in. Remember, Alt to subtract and standard to drive, and you can play around with the hardness and spacing and stuff like that. But most of the time quick selection is going to do a pretty good job of that for your image. Now the handy one is actually the next tool down for doing fine detail, and it's called the refine edge tool. And I'm going to get a reasonable sized brush for this. I can't guarantee how well this is going to work. It works great on hair if it's got a good background, but what you can do with this is you drag this along the edge of your selection area, and it will hopefully try and figure out what you're trying to remove, and it's usually more for edges than anything else. So as I move it around these branches, you can see it's trying to hide those branches, sorry, the sky behind that, and it can do a pretty reasonable job of this, and it starts bringing stuff back. So it does need to have an edge for it to really work correctly. So you do need to sort of already apply a mask area to this, as you can see in the red, so for it to work. So it needs to know kind of close to where the edge is. Mine's going to slow down severely, but if I go down here, for example, on the grass, and I click away, it's not really going to do much because the mask is all the way up the top here. And I may have crashed my computer. No, keep going. So it'll only do around the mask area, and down here it's the mask's too far away, so it's not an edge, so it's going to probably mess around there. Remember, if you need to do the opposite of this, Alt will do that as well. And we also have some other options in here: radius, smooth, feather, contrast, shift edge. If you need to move the edge in or out, you can play around with that. Most of the time, I usually don't find it all that useful, but be my guest and have a play around with it. Once you've done that, hit OK, and you'll step out of the mask mode. There you have it, and there is our mask. And once I said, one of the best things about masks is it is non-destructive, so you can always go back and repair it. So if you accidentally erase part of something, you can click on your mask and either enter into mask mode, or you can just simply use your brush tool, or selection tools and a brush tool, or gradient tool even. You can add a gradient to this, and you can add transparencies to it and all sorts of weird and wonderful things. And it's non-destructive, so we do not destroy that layer. And I will quite often use masks when I'm adding objects for my matte paintings, because I know that I'm not going to mess it up completely. So when I do go into the tutorials for creating and importing and depatching objects, I will quite often use the mask technique as opposed to copy and paste directly or erasing, which is pretty much destructive and pretty hard to do a repair of. So there we have it. Those are the two other sort of higher end stuff. If you do need to get fine detail like trees and stuff like that, and edges, channels and mask and mask modes are fantastic for that sort of stuff, but can be a little finicky and a little bit time consuming. But if your subject calls for it, then they are definitely some of the best ones to use. Alright.